You were no warrior.
This one hungers. Some of the fiercest creatures to ever exist. Prove your might against this magnificent beast. Challenger.
I have a buyer. Yes? All right, your order is registered.
Hello! This is going to be a build guide for the Infernal Legion Rhoa Titan build that I've been playing the last little while. I will say this build does rely on a bug for a bulk of its damage. It wasn't bug fixed last league, wasn't bug fixed this league, but when it happens, and it will happen, this will lose a lot of damage. So, and on top of that, it doesn't deal the most damage. It's not like super tanky, and it's not super fast. It's just chill and kind of a goofy build idea that you really don't need to do much for it to work. So, if you're looking for something to blast with, this is not going to be the build for you. If you're looking for something that's easy and doesn't really require any input from you besides moving around, you can give this a try. So, to start off, we'll look at the items. I'm using a Vertex with +3 to level all skills. This rolls from 2 to 4. If you can't afford a +3 or 4, then you might be better off going for a rare helmet with +2 to the level of all minion skills with resists, life, intelligence, and armor. I have this with Chaos Res, and skill gems have no attribute requirements. The skill gem line is bugged, I believe, because you still need the attribute requirements to be able to equip the gem, but once it is equipped, you don't need them anymore. What this means is basically I've been playing this character with an Astromentus in my prison wallet, so that if I ever need to equip gems or move gems around or move gear around, then I just put the Astromentus on, sort the gems, and then take the Astromentus off and put my normal amulet back on. The next unique we're using is the Brass Dome. We use this for high armor, a little bit of stun threshold, and take no extra damage from critical hits, but basically just makes it a lot better for mitigating kind of one-shots and more bursty damage. You want this with the lowest roll possible on the penalty to all maximum elemental resistances, because there is a noticeable difference between having 70% max res and having 74% max res, even though it doesn't seem too much, should I say. The next one is Darkness Enthroned. This item gains bonuses from socket items as though it was a helmet. There are different versions of this. So if you're going for this one specifically, make sure it is a helmet one. 96% increased effective socket items is kind of like 95%, I think, would be the minimum I would go for on this. 100% really expensive, but 95 perfectly fine. In this, we have Socketed Guatalitz's Thesis. I don't know how expensive these are right now because the trade site is down, but basically gain armor equal to 25% of life loss from hits in the past 8 seconds, and also enemies you curse take 6% increased damage. Then in the belt, this is increased by 96%, so it's 49% instead of 25, and 11% instead of 6%. And then the last unique we're using is Calandra's Touch, which basically just reflects the other ring that you have equipped. These are dirt cheap. Normally they're pretty expensive, but they're like a couple of chaos this league, so it lets you spend a lot more on one really good ring that you can then reflect, so long as you're just using it for, say, like life and resistances, and you don't need different stats on your rings. We're using a rare Spear for strength, dexterity, and companions deal increased damage. This is pretty easy to do. You basically just need the suffixes that you want and an empty prefix, and then I believe it's an Amanamu Omen, and then you desecrate with the Amanamu Omen active, and you're basically guaranteed companions deal increased damage. Then a rare ring with life and resistances on I've got this in a breach ring for quality, basically, for whatever you need it with. This is not a great ring. I generally try to spend as little as possible for decent items, so this isn't like min-maxed or anything like that. Gloves is armor, life, resistances, and mana per enemy killed. The mana per enemy killed isn't super important, but it does help a bit with sustain. Boots are movement speed, life, resistances, and armor. The amulet is life, level to all minion skills, resistances that you need. I have this on a dex base just to get a bit more dex, and I have increased armor. The increased armor is not super duper important, but obviously if you can get it, good. I've allocated the Howling Primate for increased presence area of effect. Aura skills have 10% increased magnitude and 10 to intelligence. Presence area of effect is pretty important for the main sort of what enables your damage, and then the aura skills magnitude is basically for blasphemy. Your curses are applied as auras, so aura effect scales that, or aura magnitude. And then the last thing that we really need to talk about is the scepter. The base is very important. An omen scepter with the malice skill is what you need for this. But for stats, it's +4 to level of all minion skills. Minions have increased maximum life, and at least 144 spirit for this exact setup. Obviously, if you can't get 144 spirit, you can just take some of the support gems out of the reserve spirit. It really won't make that much of a difference. I basically grabbed a scepter with decent suffixes and an empty prefix, and then desecrated it, and you'll have a pretty good chance of getting some spirit that way. But yeah, that's what I did. Any other stats on this do not affect your Rhoa, because I don't know if it's bugged, but basically when you're riding the Rhoa, you are counted in your Rhoa's presence, but your Rhoa is not counted in yours. So you'll benefit from any mod that gives you X if your companion's in your presence, but your companion won't. I'm not entirely sure why, but yeah, that's something to keep in mind if you were thinking about why are you not getting increased damage on the scepter. It's because it doesn't work. The reason why Malice is important is because the bug is, if an enemy has at least one stack of critical weakness, Infernal Legion has a 100% crit chance, which means that you only need to scale crit damage, which is an absolutely insane multiplier. That's where the bulk of your damage comes from. And then in weapon swap, I have a Scythe as Spear. Aggravating enemy bleeding with this weapon also aggravates all ignites on the target, and an aggravated ignite deals 100% extra damage. I don't use this for anything besides bosses like King of the Mist, Zesh, that kind of thing, just because you don't really need to. It doesn't speed up your damage on other bosses, like map bosses, that much, and generally it lets you play a little bit lazier, just because you have the increased damage from this, which works perfectly fine. So yeah, 2700 life, a decent chunk of armor, 20k, capped resistances, obviously 74% max res because of Brass Dome, and yeah, this number here, 86% that is shown for me having 20k armor, is a complete junk number. It is meaningless. Armor is basically, it has a formula on how the mitigation is calculated, and basically the higher the hit, the less your armor will be applied to it. The smaller the hit, the more your armor will be applied to it. So this 86% is a complete lie. It's basically estimated based on an enemy of equal level to you, I believe. There's so many enemies in the game, and then you have rares and magic monsters and all this stuff that just it's just not factored in. So basically, yeah, ignore this number. It means nothing. The idea for armor is to get as much as you can. It really is the best way to try and think of like what's a good number for armor, is just as much as you can get. That basically covers that. That covers the items. I think I covered everything anyway. Charms, basically just immunity to shock, and then I was trying this Forsaken Bangle. I would just go for a freeze charm probably. But yeah, that covers the items. Now, we are playing it on a Titan, mostly for Hulking form. For 50% increased effect of small passive skills, this means that any small nodes that give minion damage, minion life, crit damage, blah blah blah, these are all way more powerful. Stone Skin for 50% more armor from equipped body armor, because we're using the Brass Dome, this is great for defenses. And then Mysterious Lineage for 15% more maximum life. We path down here to Polished Iron for gain additional stun threshold equal to 30% of item armor on equipped armor items. Now, this is really specific. You can see here you have an item armor stat 4,636 for the current setup that I've got. And this basically means that we get stun threshold equal to that, or equal to 30% of that number. And this is important because while you're mounted on your Rhoa, you will constantly be building up heavy stun whenever you get hit. So you really want to get as high a stun threshold as you possibly can. Then we have near at hand for reduced skill effect duration. We come over here, I have an Aminamu, Undying Hate. The number doesn't matter, but it has to be Aminamu. We'll give you the Sacrifice of Flesh Keystone. The name on the Undying Hate is what determines the keystone. The number is what determines what these nodes are turned into. But none of these nodes really matter to you. So Aminamu is the only thing you care about for this. For Sacrifice of Flesh, which is when taking damage from hits, 20% of life loss is prevented, and then 150% of the life loss prevented is lost over 4 seconds. So basically what that means is, you take a hit, you prevent 20% of that hit, and then 150% of that amount that was prevented is then kind of dealt as damage over time. We come up here, we grab some small nodes for increased companion maximum life and damage. Then we have Licking Wounds for max life, Growing Swarm for area of effect, Profane Commander for presence area of effect and Spirit, Mind Over Matter to turn your mana pool into a buffer for your life pool. We come up here, we grab Lord of Horrors because this just helps with your reservations. For Rhoa, because it did get a lot more expensive this league. Right Hand of Darkness for more AoE. Down this side for some life, we grab Gigantic Following. Your minions are gigantic. It basically is 20% more maximum life, 20% more damage, and 20% increased size. The size doesn't really matter. But this does also have 25% reduced reservation efficiency of minion skills, so that's kind of why we take Lord of Horrors as well. We path down here to Necrotized Flesh. This just gives a bunch of minion max life. Up here to Dead Can Dance. Minions have increased maximum life. Again, with a few more levels, you would grab both of these minion crit damage bonus small nodes. Then over here to Forthcoming for reduced skill effect duration. I'll explain why once we do the skills. Then for jewels, we have rare jewels with presence area of effect, and minions have increased critical damage bonus. These are the two important stats, but you can also get minions deal increased damage on the same jewels. I have 2 of these currently socketed. We have, obviously, the Undying Hate, as I said before. We have a From Nothing passives in the radius of Crimson Assault can be allocated without being connected to your tree. That means that we can allocate these nodes down here. So we have, again, just companion damage and life, and also Nourishing Ally for 20% companion life. And then this small node here, 37% increased stun threshold if you haven't been stunned recently. This is good because while you're mounted, you cannot be light stunned, you can only be heavy stunned once your bar fills up. So for the whole time that you're mounted, you have 37% increased stun threshold. For one node, it's quite a lot. And then the last thing is the Megalomaniac for Grip of Evil. Grip of Evil is this node here. Minions have 40% increased critical damage bonus. I also have Nourishing Ally on this just by pure chance, which saved me 1 point on the tree. You don't need to worry about going for this. Again, it will just save you 1 point on the tree. If you can get Polished Iron and Grip of Evil on the same Megalomaniac, which would probably be hundreds of divines if it exists, that would save you a number of points, but yeah. And then last we'll go into the skill gems themselves. So Malice, again, is important because critical weakness will allow your Infernal Legion to have a 100% crit chance due to a bug. Now, one thing to note about this is when it says it applies critical weakness to enemies every 0.51 seconds, what that means is that it will check your presence for an enemy to apply it to every 0.5 seconds. So if an enemy walks into your presence in that time, it won't be applied until the next check. Whereas obviously normally when things work this way, it'll be when an enemy enters your presence, it'll be applied, and then every 0.5 seconds after that, but that's not how this works. So what this can mean is that you might have moments where the enemy will get ignited in that small gap before the critical weakness is applied, and then you'll have a slightly weaker, well, a much weaker ignite until the next application of critical weakness. It's not super duper noticeable, but sometimes it might happen on bosses, and you'll have slightly worse DPS for like a few seconds. So long as they have at least one stack, it'll work. Now the bread and butter of this entire build is Rhoa mount. Now this is, you basically want to pump the level as high as possible and the quality as high as possible. All of your damage comes from Infernal Legion. Minions from support skills take 30% of the maximum life as fire damage per second. Minions from support skills ignite enemies within a radius of 2 meters as though dealing base fire damage equal to 25% of the minion's maximum life. So that's why we pump as much minion life as possible and companion life as possible so that you can get that base damage really high. Then we use Searing Flame 2 for 100% more magnitude of ignite inflicted with support skills. We have Super Critical because we don't care about our crit chance, we only care about crit bonus or crit damage bonus. So this gives us basically 100% increased, which is huge. Zoph's Pyre, support skills gain 40% of fire damage as extra chaos damage, and chaos damage from hits with support skills also contributes to flammability and ignite magnitudes. Now, this skill does not hit, but it is calculated as though it does hit. So basically what this does with Infernal Legion is it will store 25% of the minion's maximum life as a flat base fire damage value, and then ignite as though dealing that damage, similar to how things like Incinerate and Flame Wall work. So this is basically just 40% more damage. And then the last one, which is quite important, is Diala's Desire. This is +1 to the level of all support skills, +10 to the quality of supported skills, and also a 90% cost and reservation multiplier, which basically means that this reserves less spirit now with this. And thankfully, this league, these support gems drop significantly more, so it's only about 1 divine, which is way cheaper than it was. I think it was about 30 something divines last league, so this is super cheap in comparison. Zoph's Pyre is around about 6 divines last time I checked, but if you can't use this, just use Feeding Frenzy 1 or 2, doesn't really matter, and you'll get pretty good damage. The next one is Explosive Spear. This is mostly just if you want to aggravate and ignite, or apply exposure from the ignite, because once an enemy is ignited by Rhoa Mount or Infernal Legion, any fire damage dealt to them will also ignite with 100% chance, because the flammability magnitude is already at 100%. So that means that any hit with this with fire exposure support gem will give a bit of exposure. So on this we have Short Fuse, so it detonates faster, Rapid Attack Speed because we don't care about the damage of it, just the attack speed, Fire Exposure for exposure, Potent Exposure to make that stronger, and then Bleed 3 because this allows you to guarantee the bleed for Scythe's Spear. If you don't care about using Scythe's Spear and you don't mind doing a bit less damage, you can switch this for whatever you want. Blasphemy Aura with 20% quality is important on this because it increases the reservation efficiency. Elemental Weakness, Heightened Curse for increased magnitude, Ritualistic Curse for increased area of effect, and then Lightning Mastery, Fire Mastery, or Cold Mastery will give you +1 level to your Elemental Weakness. And then the last gem we're using is Time of Need. While active, periodically invokes Divine Blessings to heal you, remove curses and elemental ailments from you. And basically, with Titan, the reason why we're taking the reduced skill effect duration nodes is the duration determines how much time there is between blessings. So with this setup, using compressed duration 2 for 35% less skill effect duration, we can get the blessings down to 1.29 seconds. And what this means is every time you see that flash, you're healing for 817 life and removing all curses and elemental ailments. So it is very good for sustain and very good for not having to deal with temp chains in maps, which makes me want to commit Sudoku. And then the last things we're using is Upwelling 2 for 50% increased minion damage while you're not on full mana. Because you're using Mind Over Matter, you're basically going to have your mana spent quite often. And then Cannibalism 2 for life on kill. Now, one thing to note is, although this is a minion build, technically, and the minion is doing all of the damage, kills from damage over time, regardless of source, are attributed to the player for a number of reasons. But basically, it basically means that you don't lose out on like your rarity or anything like that, and it means that you can benefit from life on kill builds that deal damage over time, or minions specifically deal damage over time. Yeah, that will about cover it. As you can see, yeah, you literally have like 4 skills equipped, 3 skills if you don't care about Explosive Spear. It's a very chill build. Like I said, I've been using this to run ultimatums, and it's been pretty good currency. I'm sat on 636 divines, because you can make like 60, 80 divines an hour just doing ultimatums, and I've been farming that with this build, so yeah. Hopefully, if you try it, you enjoy it. If you have any questions at all, feel free to ask them in the comments. I will answer anything about the game, even if it's not relevant to the build. Thanks for watching, and I'm sorry this build guide took so long.